The timing of forever. Part 1. The fluorescent lights of the office hummed faintly above his head as he closed another file, the ink of his signature barely dry before he stacked it neatly on the growing pile of contracts. It was late afternoon in Taipei, the kind of day where the sky outside was a muted gray, neither promising rain nor sunshine, just a dull blanket that matched the rhythm of his life. He was 38, successful by most measures, yet every tick of the clock felt like a reminder of how little spark remained in his days. His office was on the second floor of a modest building, one that housed a few small businesses, including a newly opened cafe on the ground floor. He had noticed the scent of butter and sugar drifting up the stairwell occasionally, but never paid much attention, until the day he descended the stairs and found himself in that classic deadlock, face to face with a man carrying a tray of pastries. The man was in his mid-30s, his apron dusted with flour, his smile quick and apologetic as they both stepped aside in the narrow stairwell, neither quite sure who should move first. The lawyer muttered a polite sorry and slipped past, but something about the encounter lingered. The patissier had eyes that seemed to carry warmth, a kind of quiet attentiveness, and though the lawyer didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of a rhythm that would change the cadence of his life. For years, the lawyer's life had been defined by schedules, deadlines, and the relentless pursuit of efficiency. He woke at 6, showered, dressed in muted suits, and arrived at the office before most of his colleagues. His work was meticulous, his reputation solid, but his personal life was a hollow shell. Friends had drifted away, relationships had fizzled, and his family, though proud of his success, rarely saw him outside of obligatory gatherings. He lived alone in a small apartment, functional and clean, but devoid of warmth. Evenings were spent with takeout meals and half-watched television shows, his mind too drained to engage in anything more. The patissier, on the other hand, had only recently moved into the building. His café was small but inviting, with warm lighting, shelves lined with jars of ingredients, and a display case that gleamed with delicate pastries. He had spent years honing his craft, working in kitchens across Asia before deciding to settle in Taipei. For him, baking was not just a profession but a language, a way to communicate care, joy, and memory. He had noticed the lawyer long before their stairwell encounter, watching him rush past the cafe with a briefcase in hand, his expression always tight, his steps brisk. There was something about the man that intrigued him, though he couldn't quite say why. Over the next 2 weeks, their paths crossed repeatedly. Sometimes it was in the stairwell, sometimes at the entrance, sometimes in the cafe itself, when the lawyer stopped briefly to buy a coffee. Each time, their exchanges were brief, a nod, a hi, a polite smile. Yet these small gestures began to form a thread, subtle but persistent. The lawyer found himself anticipating these encounters, noticing when they didn't happen, feeling a strange absence when the patissier wasn't there. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of meetings, the lawyer descended the stairs and realized he hadn't seen the patissier at all. The cafe lights were dimmed, the door locked. He paused, surprised at the pang of disappointment that struck him. It was irrational, he told himself. He didn't even know the man's name. But the absence was undeniable. The next morning, he resolved that if they crossed paths again, he would speak, really speak, not just nod or smile. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As he stepped into the stairwell, the patissier was coming up, carrying a box of supplies. They paused, the familiar deadlock returning, but this time the lawyer smiled. "You're from the cafe downstairs, right?" he asked. The patissier nodded, setting the box against the wall for a moment. "Yes. I opened it about a month ago." His voice was calm, with a hint of warmth that matched his eyes. "I've seen you around," the lawyer admitted. "I'm well. I work upstairs." "A lawyer?" The patissier's smile widened slightly. "I know. You always look busy." The lawyer chuckled, a sound that surprised even him. "That's one way to put it." And just like that, the thread tightened. They spoke for a few minutes about the cafe, about the building, about the lawyer's long hours. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was enough to shift something inside him. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of curiosity, a desire to know more. Over the following days, their conversations grew. Sometimes brief, sometimes lingering, always marked by a quiet ease. The lawyer began stopping by the cafe more often, not just for coffee but for pastries, for the chance to talk. He learned that the patissier had grown up in Taichung, had trained in Paris, had a love for creating desserts that balanced tradition with innovation. The patissier, in turn, learned about the lawyer's burnout, his long hours, his sense of emptiness. He listened without judgment, offering small insights, sometimes just silence. The cafe became a refuge. The lawyer found himself lingering after work, watching the patissier at his craft, the way he measured ingredients, the way he folded dough, the way he plated each pastry with care. There was something grounding about it, something that reminded him of the value of patience, of attention, of joy in small things. And slowly, the dull rhythm of his life began to change. The lawyer's visits became a quiet ritual. At first, he told himself it was about convenience. The cafe was downstairs, the coffee was good, and the pastries were better than anything he could find nearby. But soon, he realized it wasn't convenience that drew him back. It was the patissier himself, the way he seemed to embody a kind of calm that the lawyer had long forgotten existed. One evening, after a long day of drafting contracts, the lawyer stopped by the cafe just before closing. The patissier was wiping down the counter, his apron dusted with cocoa powder. "You're still here," the lawyer said, surprised. The patissier looked up, smiling. "I usually stay late. There's always something to clean, something to prepare for tomorrow." The lawyer hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever get tired of it?" The patissier thought for a moment. "Of course. But it's different from the kind of tired you get from work like yours. This is fulfilling. Even when I'm exhausted, I know I've created something that brings joy to people. That makes it worth it." The lawyer nodded, feeling a pang of envy. He couldn't remember the last time his work had felt fulfilling. It was necessary, it was respected, it paid well, but joy? That was something he hadn't associated with his career in years. They talked for a while longer about small things, the weather, the neighborhood, the lawyer's favorite foods. When the lawyer finally left, he felt lighter, as though the weight of his day had been eased by this simple act of conversation. The next morning, he found himself thinking about the patissier as he dressed for work. He wondered what pastries he might bake that day, what new flavors he might experiment with. It was a strange thought, but it lingered. Over the next week, their conversations deepened. The lawyer learned that the patissier had once dreamed of opening a cafe in Paris, but had chosen Taipei instead, drawn by the city's energy and its blend of tradition and modernity. He spoke of his love for creating desserts that told stories, pastries inspired by childhood memories, by travels, by fleeting moments of beauty. The lawyer found himself captivated. He had spent years immersed in contracts and clauses, in the rigid language of law. To hear someone speak of food as art, as memory, as connection, it was refreshing, almost intoxicating. One evening, the patissier offered him a new creation, a delicate tart filled with oolong tea custard, topped with candied orange peel. "It's inspired by my grandmother," he explained. "She used to brew oolong tea every afternoon. The orange peel was her way of adding brightness." The lawyer took a bite, and for a moment, he was stunned. The flavors were subtle yet profound, the kind that lingered on the tongue and evoked something deeper than taste. He looked at the patissier, realizing that this was more than just food. It was a glimpse into his world, into his memories. "It's incredible," the lawyer said softly. The patissier smiled, his eyes warm. "I'm glad you like it." That night, as the lawyer walked home, he felt something stirring inside him. It wasn't just admiration for the patissier's craft. It was a sense of connection, of being seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Days turned into weeks, and their encounters became a rhythm. Sometimes brief, sometimes lingering, always marked by a quiet intimacy. The lawyer began to notice details, the way the patissier's hands moved with precision, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke of a new recipe, the way he listened with genuine attention. And slowly, the lawyer began to open up. He spoke of his burnout, of the endless hours, of the emptiness that had crept into his life. He admitted that he often felt like he was living on autopilot, moving through days without purpose. The patissier listened, never interrupting, never judging. When he finally spoke, his words were simple but profound. Maybe you need to find something outside of work that gives you joy. Something that reminds you you're more than your job. The lawyer thought about that for days. He realized that his life had become defined entirely by his career, that he had neglected everything else, friendships, hobbies, even simple pleasures. He wondered if it was too late to change, if he had already lost too much. But then he remembered the tart, the oolong custard, the orange peel. He remembered the warmth in the patissier's eyes. And he realized that maybe it wasn't too late. One evening, as they sat in the cafe after closing, the lawyer asked, "Why did you notice me before we met? You said you'd seen me around." The patissier hesitated, then smiled. "You always looked so focused, so serious. I wondered what kind of person you were outside of work. I guess I was curious." The lawyer chuckled. "You probably thought I was boring." The patissier shook his head. "No. I thought you looked lonely." The word struck him like a chord. Lonely. It was true, though he rarely admitted it. He had built walls around himself, walls of professionalism and routine, but inside, he was isolated. To hear someone else see it, it was both painful and liberating. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the words hanging between them. Then the patissier added softly, "I'm glad we met." The lawyer looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Me too." The cafe was quiet that evening, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound as the lawyer lingered by the counter. He had stayed later than usual, watching the patissier finish his closing routine. There was a pause, a moment where the silence felt almost heavy, and then the lawyer cleared his throat. "You know," he said, "we've been talking for a while now, but I don't even know your name." The patissier looked up, surprised, then smiled. "You're right. I should have introduced myself earlier. I'm Wei Lun." He extended his flour-dusted hand across the counter. The lawyer hesitated only briefly before taking it. "Liang Chen," he replied. Liang Chen." Wei Lun's smile widened. "Nice to officially meet you, Liang Chen." Liang Chen felt a strange warmth at hearing his name spoken aloud in that gentle tone. It was such a simple thing, yet it carried weight. Names had power, he thought. They made things real. From that moment, their conversations shifted subtly. They were no longer just two strangers crossing paths in a stairwell or cafe. They were Liang Chen and Wei Lun, two men whose lives had begun to intertwine. Over the next few days, Liang Chen found himself repeating Wei Lun's name in his mind, testing the sound of it, savoring the way it felt. He noticed how naturally it came to him in conversation, how it seemed to anchor their exchanges. And Wei Lun, in turn, seemed to enjoy saying Liang Chen, his voice always carrying a hint of warmth. One evening, Liang Chen stayed after closing again, sitting at a corner table while Wei Lun experimented with a new recipe. The air was filled with the scent of butter and chocolate, and Liang Chen watched as Wei Lun moved with precision, his hands steady, his focus absolute. "You really love this, don't you?" Liang Chen asked. Wei Lun glanced up, smiling. "I do. Baking it's like telling a story without words. Every pastry has a memory behind it, a reason it exists. It's my way of connecting with people." Liang Chen leaned back, considering. "I wish I felt that way about my work. Most days, it feels like I'm just surviving. Pushing papers, arguing cases, meeting deadlines. It's all so mechanical." Wei Lun set down his whisk, wiping his hands on his apron. "Maybe you've forgotten why you started. What made you want to be a lawyer in the first place?" Liang Chen paused. It had been years since he'd asked himself that question. "I wanted to help people," he admitted. "To give them a voice, to protect them. But somewhere along the way, it became about billable hours and corporate clients. The spark disappeared." Wei Lun nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe it's still there, buried under everything else. Sometimes you just need someone or something to remind you." Liang Chen looked at him, realizing that Wei Lun might be that reminder. Their conversations grew more personal after that. Liang Chen spoke of his childhood in Kaohsiung, of his parents' pride when he became a lawyer, of the loneliness that had crept into his life despite his success. Wei Lun shared stories of his training in Paris, of the long nights spent perfecting techniques, of the joy he felt when someone's face lit up after tasting his creations. They laughed together, too, about small things, about the quirks of the building they shared, about the eccentric customers who came into the cafe. Liang Chen found himself smiling more than he had in years, his laughter genuine, unforced.